you are now honorary Chicagoans. So if you're here for the Azure Sentinel talk, you're in the right space. I've got a few assumptions of the audience here. First is, you know what a SIEM is, even if you don't know how to pronounce it, because it makes no sense, because there's SIMs and SEMs to become SIMs. Anyway, you have some understanding of Azure. I'll speak up. Better? Let's move this. And again, any one of these will do. Your robot overlords demand you attend an ML-related talk. You're a friend here to fuck with me. These are my people. You're an enemy here to fuck with me. Yeah. I have more Malort for you people. And you like Jepson Malort? This talk is not sponsored by them, by the way. And honestly, if none of these apply to you, feel free to leave because I'm going to bore the hell out of you. So, who am I? I'm InfoSec Dave Grohl. You may know me from the Foo Fighters or my personal favorite, Drunk History. No, actually, I'm not. And this is just something to warn you that bad news is coming. Whenever you see goats on the screen, expect the worst. I'm not actually Dave Grohl. I know this is a surprise. My name's Carl Hertz. I'm the director of IT at Elevate Energy in Chicago, Illinois. I've been doing this for about 30 years and security for 12. I'm on the board for Blue Team Con. We got some Blue Team Connor people here who aren't even paying attention, Frank. Co-founder of Cocktail Con. And Dr. Jane Goodall says, I hug like a chimp. So there's my odd fact about me. So, as I said, I've been doing this kind of stuff for 30 years. I'm going to throw up some of the systems that I've implemented over those years. This is just to give you more of an idea of my background technically in what I do. I've been an operations person for most of my career, setting up and breaking systems on a regular basis. This list is going to keep going for a while, just to give you an idea of some of the different areas of IT and security that I've been involved with. I've been everywhere from in a call center to managing a call center to being the director of security to doing incident response. And again, in my current role of director of IT, I am responsible for making sure that security compliance and policy is taken care of and met. And I think that's it, except for the important one. Well, I've broken a lot of shit over the years. Microsoft, that's why we're here, right? More specifically, Microsoft Azure. How many Microsoft people in the room? Yeah? And how many of you are actually using Azure? Decent number, cool. So, in this talk, I'm going to go over an overview of what Sentinel is, talk about how it does data collection, how it does alerts and dashboards, going to touch on playbooks, notebooks, and just do kind of a summary of my experience. For those of you who are not fully aware of Sentinel, it is a preview release, or not even a preview release. It is out there for non-production systems. So I will say this right off the bat. If you're interested in Sentinel, don't roll it out in your production environment at this time. Things change rapidly in it currently. So let's start our overview. So it has some basic components from the entire Azure platform kind of rolled together. Log analytics, the data explorer, Kuso query language, if any of you are familiar with that. That's their language that they wrote for doing high-speed queries. The Azure Fusion machine learning, the playbooks, which are essentially just logic decision makers, and notebooks, which are hosted in the Jupyter system. And I'll touch on that a little bit as well. So some of the features that they are touting about this is that it will keep your data for 2 years. Exporting data to other systems is planned but not yet implemented, so that for compliance reasons, if you have longer periods than 2 years, it should be available to do that in the future. It is what's called Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response, or SOAR. Who here has heard of SOAR yet? Wow. Good percentage of you. So for those who don't, it's basically, as I kind of touched on before, there was SIEM and SIEM, and now we've got SIEM again, but spelled SIEM. And SOAR is the next level, which I guess is supposed to get rid of your analysts in the NOC. No, not really. But, you know, if you listen to Gartner, that's what they say. But obviously it's not that. But it is supposed to automate some of that response for you. It links into the Microsoft Intelligence Security Graph, which last I read takes in about 9 trillion records a day. So if you're ever wondering why in Windows 10 you can't shut off all the telemetry, it's part of that 9 trillion. And it's currently free, as in beer, which is really nice that they're rolling this out to the community to test at no per user cost. There are costs associated with your Azure account. You still have to pay for storage and stuff like that, but the actual service of Sentinel does not have an additional upfront cost to start with. So it's a good time to kind of dive in and play around with it and not worry about everything that you're going to be, all the costs you're going to be incurring. So let's go over some SIEM use cases. I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but I'm just going to kind of break it down into the categories that I think about when I think SIEM. You've got event detection issues. You've got investigation issues. You've got incident response issues. And of course, you've got compliance issues, which is a big one for me. What a lot of people, the mistake that a lot of companies make when they are rolling out a SIEM is that they try to do all of this at once and usually fails miserably. When you are setting up a SIEM, it is really important that you prioritize what you're wanting to do, what are the main concerns that you want to aggregate data for your company, and start picking those off one at a time. And so you have your project to launch your SIEM, but then it's a iterative process, like much of security, that every year or every quarter or whatever time frame you're going by, you look at what's your next level of improvement and start adding those things in. So let's get to data sources here. In a SIEM, you're generally wanting to get as much data in as possible to be useful for you. Again, just have a few of the data sources listed here, but quite technically, anything with a log can and should be able to go into a SIEM. Now, you don't necessarily want to log everything, especially if you're using a SIEM that is on a per dollar charge for data throughput. The fact of the matter is, it's just not a good way to do things anyway. The SIEM is not the central log system. The SIEM is the analysis system. And this is just some general bad news, is that, of course, you're not the NSA, or actually, I didn't ask that. Anyone here from the NSA? No? Okay. Jeff Mann's out smoking. Anyway. So, again, many of the data sources, as I mentioned, are too high volume. DHCP and NetFlows and endpoint detection response telemetry, Sysmon even, unfiltered, can be massive. And of course, DNS, which, as we all know, it was DNS. It was rule number 1. So you have to pick and choose your data sources. Again, fortunately, right now, for the preview release of Sentinel, you don't have to worry about a lot of those costs to start with. So first thing we're doing when we're actually setting up Azure, and you can do it yourself, you have to have an Azure subscription. Excuse me, I'll get that pronunciation right one of these years. You create your log analytics workspace. As I mentioned earlier, it is kind of the backbone of what Sentinel does. You create an Azure Security Center workspace. You deploy the Sentinel product, and you deploy the machine learning product through PowerShell script. For me, it took 15 minutes to do this. I've deployed 3 other SIEMs, and it was much longer than 15 minutes. So it's pretty impressive how Microsoft has taken a lot of their existing technologies and, for a lack of a better term, MacGyvered it into a SIEM. So let's go into the data collection process, which is first, obviously, you've got your SIEM posted, but you need to get actual logs into your SIEM. So how has Microsoft dealt with this? Well, they have a bunch of connectors, which are just in and your usual tiled Microsoft look, where, hey, we want to connect Azure Active Directory. It's a button. You click it, and you click OK. And it's in. All of these products that you see here, the 10 here, in addition to other outside sources, are literally 2 clicks away from adding to your SIEM. It's quite fantastic. And at this point of my adventure of deploying it, I was pleasantly thrilled to see that I could get a large part of my organization's data into the application without much frustration. So all 10 of these took about an hour. That's it. So again, we're an hour and 15 in to my messing around with Sentinel, and I've got a large amount of telemetry coming in and going in and being processed by Sentinel. Connecting on-prem machines obviously requires an agent. For Windows, pretty straightforward. Linux instructions could be clearer, especially when you're doing the CEF style of data. For those of you who aren't familiar with Ceph, it is basically syslog on steroids. So it gives you a lot more data. So, a little side note here for those of you who are primarily in Active Directory organizations. Jessica Payne at Microsoft did a nice blog post on Windows event forwarding. Oh, and by the way, for those of you taking pictures, go ahead, but I will have the slide deck available for links and resources in here because, as usual, the hyperlinks are quite long, so it'll be available to you after the program at some point. So in her blog, she does an excellent job of explaining how to forward all of your events to one machine, which gives you one data collection point for Sentinel in this case, for however much data that machine is able to process. It's a great feature that I have found just on general straw polls of asking other sysadmins. Not a lot of people are using it, and I don't know why. Because being able to... Excuse me? Huh? I don't know. Sorry. I can look that up, though. So it does a really good job of centralizing all of your Windows events logs. And then, of course, there is Taylor Swift's amazing sysmon config that she put up on Decent Security, which, if any of you have ever gone through a Windows event log, it is about 95% bullshit. I'm just going to call it what it is. There are people at Microsoft who are like, I don't know what that is. So it throws up a lot of garbage, and Swift has done an excellent job of creating an XML file that filters out a lot of those issues that you don't need to see and that you don't need to have your SIEM analyze. So it's a good way to, before it even hits your SIEM, to reduce your data sizes. And again, it is really, really good to be able to deploy through group policy. It's very easy to push it out to every machine, every Windows machine on your network. And there is a new test version that includes DNS, so use it at your own risk. It is currently in alpha mode, but it will take your DNS records from all of your workstations and servers as well. So again, the bad news, for some reason, you have to post a Linux server for syslogging. Why doesn't Azure have a syslog service? Anyone from Microsoft able to answer that? No? So, again, it seemed kind of odd that in order to bring in syslogs from everything, I had to post a syslog server. Again, most of you probably already have a Linux syslog server in your environment. You can have it in Azure, you can have it on-prem, it doesn't matter, but you still need to have that Linux server running rather than a service through Azure. And again, setting up syslog, there are no preloaded facilities. I had to manually type in all the syslog facilities that I wanted to collect. And it wasn't even checkboxes. Literally, it was text fields to type them in. Very strange choice, I found. There's probably a reason behind it. I don't know why. The instructions are unclear for pretty much anything that is non-native to Azure infrastructure as far as bringing in data. Generally speaking, you're mostly worried about syslog type format or CEF format when bringing in stuff from outside sources. You can muddle through it. I did find a good blog after the fact, or a good doc after the fact about bringing in syslog. Still haven't found a very human-readable one for CEF. There are instructions out there, but again, area for improvement for the Sentinel environment. So we've got our data. Again, didn't take very long at all. Sorry, let me step back up to the mic. Did not take very long at all to get our data into the system. Again, this is excellent. They've done a good job with that. So let's talk about alerts and dashboards, because all that data sitting somewhere does you no good if you're not looking at it and analyzing it. So, as I mentioned before, the SO query language is a requirement for analyzing the data in the syslogger. It is incredibly fast for those of you who haven't used it. They say terabytes in seconds. Of course, that's kind of vague, how many terabytes and how many seconds. But it is definitely much faster at running queries than any other SIEM that I've played around with. And as I mentioned, I've worked with 3 others. One of the functions of KQL is that it actually has graphing information along with the data set. So, and you can see this when you play around with it. When you do a query, there's a tab to graph it. The graphs come up instantly. There's no processing time. It's quite nice. Unfortunately, you will have to learn KQL to make Sentinel effective at this point, at the way it's set up. There's no getting around having to learn a new language if you're not already a KQL expert. And to become an expert, pretty much every single document I found, including ones sourced from Microsoft Docs and Microsoft Blogs, point to Robert Kane's free training up at the Pluralsight website. It's a 4.5 hour video that covers most of the commands, pretty much everything that you'll need to use. I spent about 3 hours of it just kind of playing around and learning some of it. It is a good training tutorial, but as far as I can tell, it is the only resource at this point, which is also a weakness that we have, kind of this single point of failure for learning KQL. So just to give you an idea of how simple it is SQL-like. Here's an example of KQL. This is a fully functional query. And if you take a look at it, you can probably pretty quickly figure out what this is doing. I'll give you guys a couple of seconds. Anyone want to shout out what it looks like this is doing? Potential brute force detection. Yep. Within a day, 15 failed attempts within a 4-hour period, and this will flag an alert. Right? 10 lines of code. Pretty easy, right? Very useful. And human readable, which is nice. Again, this should be a fairly easy language for anyone with development experience to learn. So I went out to the GitHub for their queries, and they had one that sounded really interesting. Tracking privilege account rare activity. Again, from the techcommunity.microsoft.com site. I found a link to the code in the GitHub repo for Sentinel. And I can't save the query. Why? Because the query was 12,173 characters, and for some reason, Sentinel only allows you to put 10,000 characters in, which is a very arbitrary number. I don't know any binary system that has 10,000 as an important number, so I don't know why. But again, this is something that is in their Git repository to use that is unusable. So that was a big FU when I was banging around at it for a while. Okay, so let's move on. Let's look at some of the dashboards. This is the overview dashboard. As soon as you connect up to Sentinel, this is the top thing that you see. As you can probably tell, I've got one alert that was logged in that time period out of 453,000 signals that came through. Pretty straightforward. Down in the bottom right, it's saying data source anomalies. This is just looking at the telemetry and looking for changes. If you've ever used something like PRTG, they've got a lot of these monitors on there as well, just saying, hey, this isn't what it normally is. It doesn't really do any analysis on it. It just says, hey, this is different. Maybe take a peek at it. The incident dashboard, so I clicked on that incident, pretty nice. It prioritized it based on the rule set that I had put in there. So medium priority, I flagged it as in process, assigned it to a person. Great, okay, so now they've got a ticket. And down in the bottom right, there's a blue button that you can see that says investigate. It's like, I need to investigate the investigation button. That is supposed to bring up the incident investigation dashboard, which the video that they show is beautiful. It's this beautiful graphing with animations showing you how all the data flows for this particular incident. Coming soon! So again, it's in preview. Acceptable. There is a link to join the super exclusive club of testers of this down at the bottom of the page. Did not have time to do that. But this looks like some really nice secret sauce that they're adding to the SIEM that unfortunately is not available to the public yet. I look forward to seeing where this goes and how it works in the incident investigation process. So a couple more dashboards real quick. Active Directory sign-ins, it's going to show you what's signing in where, so on and so forth. Sign-ins by application, sign-ins by locations, failed sign-ins by user, failed sign-ins by location, which is really nice when you see that China has 37 failed logins and Russia has 8. Okay, so that includes my Office 365 instance, everything. My Outlook instance, obviously there are people poking and prodding at the perimeter. I can see that easily in my dashboard right here. I don't know for that particular graph because, excuse me? I'm sorry. would you repeat the question real quick? Got it. So the question is, does it require P1 or P2 in Office 365, or can you use the basic? And the answer is, I don't know. We are an E3 environment ourselves, so I don't know the details on different versions of Office 365 at this point. Again, this is just kind of my first dive into it. I'm not an expert on Sentinel. I'm just presenting my findings. So I guess that bit of information helps of what our environment looks like. It is an O365 E3 environment. P2 or P3? Eric, so, or P2. E3 or P2 is what I'm hearing. Thank you, Frank. Identity and access. We can see failed user logons by reason. Machine logons by type. Again, all of these dashboards are pre-built, running as soon as the product is running. Obviously, from the moment that you have those data sources to when the graphs start getting filled, takes a little bit of time. I think I saw most of them having data within an hour. Is there ability to enrich data from intel sources, as in threat intelligence? Yes, there is. There is quite the robust threat intelligence scheme. I wasn't going to be covering that in this talk, but yes, there is a way to bring in threat intelligence sources using one of the standard formats. I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head, but I'll put it in the notes for when I publish this. Okay, cool. Identity and access, I already covered that. Office 365, folder changes and file changes. This is obviously good for when you're doing things like DLP. SharePoint OneDrive, top client IP addresses. I've redded those out because a lot of those are internal IP addresses to us. Users who download the largest number of files. So again, if you see, all of a sudden one of your people who you know is leaving is downloading everything, you've got it right there. Again, built-in dashboard. Active DNS servers. This one was a head-scratcher for me. I've got 4 DNS servers in here, and it's only showing my PDC. I don't know if this is something that they've done intentionally to limit it, saying, hey, you really are only running one domain in this particular instance. Would make sense if that's the case. I didn't bring a second domain in to see if it would show that, but my assumption is it's basically going to just show one domain controller per domain. And then Azure Network Watcher, traffic flow types. This one was very interesting to me. So if you look down at the bottom, it's telling me I had 138 malicious flows. That raised some alarms for me right away, right? Okay, what are these malicious flows? So these are all the subforms on that table. I got nothing, 0 insights. It's telling me I have malicious flows. But no data. Okay, so I bring up the graph, and again, I see that 1.2% of all of my network traffic is being flagged as malicious by Sentinel. This is highly concerning. But no data. Why do you hate me, Microsoft? You give me panic attacks. So, we've got, again, some decent built-in dashboards. You can create all of your own custom dashboards as well. And again, in their GitHub repository, there are more available in JSON file format to bring in. But you will need to know Custo to bring stuff in properly. It is not terribly complicated. It's not like writing Python, but for drag and drop, it's pretty complicated to create your own. But it is doable. I made some simple ones in a few minutes, but trying to bring in multiple sources of telemetry wound up becoming a project that was bigger than was required for this presentation. Just know that dashboards can be incredibly complicated, but you'll have to put a lot of work in to make them. So they're pretty rich. I have a fly, excuse me. They are pretty rich, but again, the more level of detail you want takes a lot of effort. So we're going to talk about playbooks now. What are playbooks? Has anyone here ever used... excuse me? I heard something from the audience. It is basically Flow, yes. So Microsoft used to have a slogan, where do you want to go today? I propose that they change it to, what do you want to call it today? It's crazy, folks. Stick with a name. How many times has Skype for Business been renamed? Link, now that's going away to Teams. So anyway, it doesn't help things when the names are changing constantly. As you can see, it is essentially flows, which makes it one of the really impressive aspects of Sentinel. You can easily create workflows in Sentinel if you've had any experience with flows. Even if you haven't, here's a quick video. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. I'll kind of narrate as it goes. So I just did a search for Azure, and it basically says on any Azure event, and I click next, and I'm going to say open up and post something in Teams. So you can select your Teams channel. I don't go into all the details here, but just showing you how rapidly you can build a workflow that once a specific type of event is detected, you can have all kinds of processing happen automatically, including approvals and cancellations and escalations in all different kinds of systems, because Flows works with pretty much every vendor I've ever heard of, as far as being able to interface. So here, once I get the Teams thing in, I believe I have it next simultaneously, and that's the great thing, is you can have forking workflows, post a ticket into Jira. So it'll be done here in a second. I promise, this is fast. Oh, sorry, I'm having it created an approval message in Outlook, which then you could, again, have it not go forward until whoever is assigned to be able to approve it to make it go forward. Again, it's really slick to have this built into your SIEM. And again, because it is a long-standing Microsoft product, a lot of you will have experience with it already and aren't going to have to learn a whole new way to set up workflows. Let's go ahead and skip the rest of the video for time's sake. But yes, you can fork and bring processes back together. Logic Apps Designer. So this is, if you want to do those workflows from a pure coding base for you code monkeys out there. Again, the GitHub community repository has one playbook in GitHub. Thought that was interesting that there was one in there. But hey, it sounds really cool. It's get the geographic information from an IP and tag the incident on a map. I was like, excellent. This would be a really slick one to go through and test. So down at the bottom, it's like about, hey, here's how you do it. It's this simple. Copy and paste your code in, right? You got another goat. And again, this is direct from their source code, and I get a save logic app fail. Malicious attacks is just what I was test calling the workflow. got nowhere with the one workflow that they had coded. Obviously, this is, again, a preview. So hopefully this will get a lot of love here in the not too distant future, so that if you're wanting to do things outside of the GUI, if you do like to do a lot of scripting, you should be able to do it through scripting. I am no longer a code monkey, so I wasn't going to bother trying to troubleshoot this. So again, it is essentially Flow, and it has way more connectors than the data connectors. Again, this is a mature Microsoft product that they have rolled into Sentinel, whereas the data connectors are something new to Sentinel, because that is, how Sentinel got created by bringing these data connectors in. Hopefully, we'll see a lot more data connectors in the future, so that it works a lot more like Flow. Workbooks. So Workbooks, as I mentioned, use Jupyter. Bad joke. Okay. So Workbooks is a free hosting service of Jupyter notebooks. It's open source web documentation that contains code, of which there are 40 different languages. Obviously, the big ones that, Python is the flavor of the decade. So you can create all kinds of application scripts without having to have a hosting environment, because you just write it into this free service using Jupyter notebooks, which obviously, since you're doing full-on programming, you can have absolutely gorgeous ways to program your logic outside of the Sentinel system. Again, I am not a code monkey. I did not dive into this a lot. I do know a little bit of Python. I got a quick basic Python script running and had no problems whatsoever. This is also a way to bring in everything that is in the Azure Sentinel Git repository. So you can take the JSON scripts that are out there and bring them in the Jupyter notebooks, right? Which is a nice feature. Instead of doing copy pasta all the time, you can have your subscription to it and just run it in a notebook, so that when the Git repository changes, or you do a pull, change it, and just run it in your notebook. So again, I'm not quite sure how old Jupyter is. It seems to be a pretty decent standard. A lot of people have adopted it. I was pleasantly surprised at how well this worked, considering it was an external interface, especially considering how the other external interfaces were working with Sentinel. And last, machine learning. I can't. Sorry. It's in there. My only evidence of machine learning that I saw my whole time using it was actually running the PowerShell script to enable machine learning. That's it. So they have videos up on their website showing it detecting anomalous events and popping it up and clicking on it and getting the graph to see where everything came from. In my test environment here, I got none of that over the course of 2 months. Now, is that saying it's not there and not working and not effective? No, but there was no signal whatsoever to tell me that it was working, right? It would be nice to see even the fact that, hey, we found all these false positives or something like that. There was no insight to it. My understanding is, again, using KQL, you can do some deep dives into the machine learning aspects of it. You can subscribe to a service that allows you to actually customize the machine learning on it. But again, that's kind of outside of the scope of this this first look into Sentinel. But as someone who sat there and used it for 2 months, I did not see a single example of what they demonstrate on their video training videos. May mean I have a fairly clean environment, but again, 1.7% of my traffic is supposed to be malicious. Why am I not seeing any machine learning on that? So, is this just, again, the fact that it's a preview release and they don't have all the hooks in right now? Is this just the nature of my environment? It's a bad test environment for that. that's it. I don't know the answer to that. I wish I had some really sexy machine learning things to talk about, but I don't, which is something in and of itself. I think that reporting a negative is just as important. That I did not see any indications that machine learning was running in my environment. Other than, again, when I went back to double check to make sure that I used a PowerShell to turn the service off and back on again, and got positive messages from them. Okay, it's running. So that's pretty much it for my initial dive. As I said, I was in there for about 2 months. Saw a lot of really cool new things. Saw a lot of really bad old things. And a few head scratchers. But overall, for a preview release, I was pretty impressed. That this is something that could be an effective tool, especially with proper pricing. And I'm going to talk from my standpoint, working at a SMB, a small and medium-sized business. Looks like it could be something that would be a very effective solution for my organization. Sorry, I just want to make sure we have time for questions. So, again, it is so Microsoft that the mature aspects of it are excellent. They've taken their lumps, they've learned their lessons, they've streamlined it, made it ridiculously easy. But the new things are quite kludgy. They still don't really play well with all things Linux, even though they require it. So, again, nothing that you haven't seen already as far as Microsoft goes on that. Azure ATP. Who here uses Azure ATP? What do you think? I think it's phenomenal. I think it has become one of their better products. There's a data link to it. There is no built-in dashboard for it. If I want any of my ATP data, I wind up having to go back to ATP. It's not in my SIEM. The whole point of the SIEM is to aggregate everything and give it to me there. Is the one data source that I hooked in that it didn't say, hey, we have a control panel for that. You want it? Yes, please. So please, please, please bring that in, because that is an excellent source of information in threat hunting. Again, more detections prepackaged, and make them prepackaged, I should say. There are quite a few out there in their GitHub repository that you can load in yourself. Why aren't they there to begin with? Why do I have to go out to GitHub to get them? Some of them are just basic things that every SIEM wants to see. Have them built in and able to enable them right off the bat. Tie it into compliance frameworks, and this is probably just because I'm a director. Oh my gosh, you've got all these searches available that are directly related to controls in CIS and ISO and Cybersecurity Framework 1.2, whatever. Why not cross-reference them somehow? Give yourself a scorecard. It's not in there. It should. I would say that every SIEM should have that, but that's my opinion. A big use, as one of the top 4, is for compliance reasons. Make it easier for us. And again, if they're wanting to be the SIEM of small business, it needs to be easier, right? I like the fact that I can go in and set up and bring my data sources in a lot faster. But flies back. KQL is going to have a learning curve for any organization, especially a small business. They're not going to have the resources to dedicate to pay someone to be a KQL programmer, period. Yet it is at this point a requirement to run this product. I would like to see that change for us to be able to adopt this into a standard product into our production environment. Stepping back to the detections, there aren't, everyone, when they set up a SIEM, they're looking for buffer overflow events, looking for ping sweeps, port scans, who am I? No one's running who am I except for someone trying to exploit your stuff, right? And even if it is one of your sysadmins running it for whatever reason, again, using flows, I can say, is this one of them? Okay, I've got Duo. Hit them on second factor, say, hey, did you just do this? And if they don't respond via Duo and do a second factor, automatically start an incident on this. If they do respond to it, then close it out. Again, these kind of things would be easy to put in, except for the fact that I'm going to name a name here with Duo. Duo interfaces with Azure, but I've got no way to interface it with Sentinel at this point. You're already partnering. Let's get this really good product that works well with the rest of Azure to bring it into our flows in Defender. Excuse me, not in Defender, in Sentinel. Again, machine learning, give indications of it functioning to those of us who are not machine learning people. If the whole industry is planning on having their SIEMs work in a way that a lot of the background stuff and low-hanging fruit and false positive identifying is going to be done by machine learning, show me. I need to know, otherwise why am I paying the extra for the machine learning, right? So just a few final thoughts real quick, not related to this. I do love Microsoft. I really do. I have made hundreds of thousands of dollars supporting them over the years. Thank you, Microsoft. I do like your products. This, I hope, wasn't too much of a bashing session. This was just me trying to show what it's like as someone who posts a lot of systems over the years, what went right, what did not go right. Be kind to each other, everyone. You don't know what everyone's going through on a daily basis. And lastly, lift while you climb, right? Make sure that you're always mentoring. Make sure that you're always helping out people who are less fortunate than you. Just a personal talk. Okay? So I'm going to open up the questions, but before we do, I'd like to introduce you. I don't know how many of you are go to the sci-fi cons at all and have ever heard John Scalzi talk, but he has the Scalzi rules. What does the question contain? It contains a question. How many parts of the question? One. And how long is it? It's a tweet. Okay? So we've got about probably 5 minutes for questions. See one over here? Yes, it does. Did not hook it in because we're not running Defender. We don't have a test environment for Defender ATP. More questions? Right here. So that was the whole thing. I very much was trying to do this on my own. I did have one interaction with my support rep, and that was regarding the documentation on Sysmon. Because the logger, the log integration for events that I use was bringing in Sysmon rules as well. And because I wasn't seeing them in, I called up my representative to say, hey, is this working or not? Am I not doing this right? Where's the documentation on that? And they're the ones who pointed me to the doc. So yes, but I tried to do it with minimal asking because, again, small business doesn't always have the money for support, right? So this was trying to just go in as a veteran to see what we can do right off the bat. Go ahead. New instances, do they need any setup? What kind of instance? So if you're adding it to something that is already, so the way log analytics works is pretty much everything that you do in Azure is going into log analytics, or you can tell it to, right? Any object that you put in there, you can set up a log analytics. You can have hundreds of log analytics instances if you want to. But for this, you're setting up a specific one. And the good thing is, every object, every server, I can have going to multiple log analytics. So if you do create a new VM or you have a new SaaS or whatever in there, all you have to do is literally go in and tell it to log to that log analytics instance. So it's not automatic, but it's close enough. When you're building it, you tell it where you want it to log. Go ahead. Well, I gave the one, sorry, the question was, yeah, sorry. The question was, is there a way to filter or aggregate logs before they get in there? The fact of the matter, yes, you can using KQL before it gets into Sentinel, or again, the example that I showed with the system events monitors using